We hope you enjoy this podcast. All our conversations are inspired by films we have selected to appear on SDG.vision. So go and take a look and be inspired by people and organisations who are making valuable contributions to the Sustainable Development Goals and making our world a better place for everybody to live. Now, sit back, enjoy, be inspired, and afterwards, go and take action.
Well, welcome to the SDG Vision podcast. I'm Pierre Jones, and today we're joined by a classically trained percussionist and musical composer, Thea Rossen. Hello, welcome.
Hi, Pierre. Thanks for having me.
Terrific. Well, lovely to see you. I think you're based in Perth in Australia, is that right?
Yeah, I'm in Fremantle, just out of Perth, a beautiful port city right on the ocean.
Oh, it sounds lovely. It sounds absolutely lovely. I'm rather shocked to see you in some knitted wear today. I would have thought we always have this impression it's always incredibly baking hot in Australia, but I guess it's not always.
It's actually still winter,
Yeah.
but we are, today's about 20 degrees, so, it's pretty beautiful. I'm just tapping away inside, so I've got a jumper on, but
terrific. Well, for a change, we're hotter than you are, I think, here. We're actually having a little bit of a summer, so it's rather nice. Anyway, it's terrific to have you on. And the reason we got you on the podcast, really, was because we saw your film. Now, it's with the rather sort of snappily entitled Translating Climate Change Data into a Musical Score, which I don't think was a title of your making. I think it was a film made by the Banff Centre for Arts. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. The Banff Centre for Arts and Creativity is sort of an amazing hub where lots of different creative artists from different disciplines come to have residencies of different lengths and of different topics. And I had an amazing time there in 2017, and they offered to make a little documentary about my time there. So yes, it's all their work, and I'm so grateful for it. But they did choose the title.
That's fine, but on one level it works really well because it does explain sort of the process, really, I suppose, and what it's about. So we'll talk about it later because I think it's centred around your work, Sounds of the Reef, which is something that we saw glimpses of in that film, and that's. That film is under SDG 14 on the SDG Vision site. So if people want to go and have a look at that, they can do, which I really do recommend that they do. One of the things you said in that, which I think was the final bit that I thought, well, actually, we've got to get Thea on. You said, a society of people who are able to talk and be aware is one that is able to make change. And I think that that's quite a nice frame, really, in terms of the relationship between your work and the Sustainable Development Goals. So, as I said, we'll go on to talk about Sounds of the Reef. But first of all, perhaps it might be best for me and the audience to find out a little bit about you and why and how you became a musician.
Oh, right back to the start. Yeah, well, I am... as you mentioned, I'm a classically trained percussionist, but that wasn't really always the plan. I grew up in a very creative household. My mum's a painter, an artist, and she has an amazing ear. She was always picking up instruments and learning things by ear. She plays the flute and the piano accordion, and so we were surrounded by beautiful music while we were growing up. And I did piano and voice at school. But it wasn't until year 11 when I discovered this incredible world of contemporary percussion. A touring group came to my high school, and they were sort of a bit like Stomp. I think you get Stomp in the UK, don't you?
Yeah. Very loud percussion, very theatrical, dramatic.
Yeah. And sort of banging on trash cans and hitting broomsticks and making music out of matchboxes and that kind of thing. And it was so exciting, and I wanted to be up on stage with them, and I was very lucky. It wasn't Stomp, they're called Tetrified Percussion, but one of the people in the ensemble taught at my school. So I sort of saved up all my pocket money and got lessons from her when I was in year 11. And she showed me this world of contemporary classical percussion. even though I had always loved maths and physics and chemistry and was planning to study engineering, I ended up going to university to do a double degree of music and engineering. Wow. Because it was just too infectiously incredible, this amazing world of contemporary and orchestral music. So that's kind of what got me going. And then being included in the community of art makers and creators in Australia kept me there. And I eventually left the engineering degree, much to the horror of some of my family members, to become a professional musician. But I've never looked back. So
that's really interesting. Really interesting that it was music and engineering. I mean, it quite dramatically, quite different, obviously, different disciplines. But I think that's interesting because it kind of explains for me your interest in science as well. I mean, I was going to say it's unusual. Actually, I've met quite a few people recently who are artistic and, have a scientific understanding of the world as well, or interest in it. So perhaps we'll talk about that a bit later, actually, the similarities and the crossovers of science and music particularly. Is it possible, Thea, for you to describe your work, or is it better if you sort of used one of your pieces to describe your work, or perhaps describe your approach to your work? I'll leave it to you to decide which one.
Yeah, sure thing. I guess I am a percussionist, firstly, in my training, but I describe myself as a percussionist, a composer, and an educator. And what that sort of encompasses is quite a broad portfolio career based on, whatever project I'm working on at the time. What I'm really passionate about is creating immersive sensory performance experiences for audiences. So I direct the Ad Lib Collective, and we are an ensemble of composers and performers that does just that. So we bring multidisciplinary performers together, so often projection artists, lighting designers, staging specialists like dramaturgs, dancers and poets and climate scientists together to really communicate some of the ideas that we're really passionate about discussing with the community. So that's the kind of work that I'm really passionate about, but it's within that I do a whole lot of different things. So I'm an animateur, which is a much more common term in the UK than it is in Australia. When I say that here, people say, "What? Are you an animator?" So an animateur brings the joy of music to life. So I work with orchestras and I build education shows for children and audiences, adults as well. I tour chamber music to primary schools. I present these shows for grown-ups, and I also lecture at different universities, compose works, and play as a chamber percussionist. So I hope that kind of answers your question.
It does, and it makes me even more grateful for you giving up your time today, because it sounds as if it's pretty jam-packed, actually, I have to say. But it sounds fun and engaging for you as well as your audience. Now, I talked about Sounds of the Reef, which was included in the film that we've got under SDG 14 or an SDG Vision, and I hope this doesn't. I hope I haven't got the wrong meaning or sense of meaning behind it. But there's quite a dramatic ending to that, and all I can describe is what I perceived when I heard it, which was, it sounded to me like the sound of whales screaming, which sounds awful, but it kind of is an abrasive, startling sound really at the end of that piece. And I wondered whether you could describe the piece and why it reaches such a crescendo.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. And I'm thrilled that you've had such a response to it. That's
Thank
great.
goodness for that. I'm relieved.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my intention was slightly different, but as a composer, when you put your music out into the world, you're letting go of that control. So the fact that it touched you like that is fantastic. I guess the story of the piece is that it's based on some data that was released by the Bureau of Meteorology, which is the sort of government body that measures the weather in Australia. I'm sure you have a similar one in the UK.
We do, yeah.
And so they had this particular graph was looking at ocean surface temperatures around Australia over 100 years. I'll share that graph with you so you can have a look. But it sort of starts in the blue, being quite below zero, and then over, the years goes into the red. And so it's a very visually powerful graph. But what I wanted to do was to represent that graph musically. So I used data sonification to map the data points on the graph to notes on the vibraphone and the cello, which are the duo that I first wrote the piece for. And then as the piece progresses, you'll notice that the pitches are relatively low at the beginning. And you can also hear this other strange kind of crackling sound. And what that is recordings collected from around the Great Barrier Reef by Associate Professor Macaulay. And he used a hydrophone to capture the actual sounds that fish make. So I call it fish song. It's perhaps not as beautiful as bird song to our ears, but I'm sure that it's melodic under the water. So you start with this kind of crackling, popping sound, and then the lower notes of the music come in. And as the piece progresses, it gets higher and higher, and the intensity builds. And what you're listening to is the ocean surface temperatures rising. So as the piece gets to the end, there's elements of improvisation. So I switch from playing the vibraphone to the musical saw, which is quite an old-fashioned folk instrument that sort of originated in the US. And you can play beautiful melodies on the saw, but you can also get these sort of haunting, piercing, screeching sounds. And we wanted to sort of look forward to the data points that are off the graph that don't exist yet, and whether the Earth can sustain it or not. So it's kind of the sound of the Earth and the ocean systems no longer functioning. So maybe it's whales shrieking, but it's also kind of the extrapolation of what happens next after these points when the system doesn't work anymore. So it's quite a dark ending, and not a lot of my work is like that. But I really did want to make the point with the sounds of the reef.
No, I mean it is, and I think sometimes, obviously, we that is required. People, to hear that it is very powerful, because often we're used to reading about the dangers of climate change and the impacts of climate change, etc. But to hear it is another sensory experience altogether, and I think that's very powerful. And as you said,
I was very lucky. Oh, sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say I was really lucky to have the piece orchestrated for the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra to perform as part of one of my education shows, and hearing that intensity rising through all of the sections of the orchestra and culminating in this kind of intense shrieking on the instruments was pretty amazing. So I was very lucky to have that opportunity.
No, absolutely. And as you say there, that there's no need to excuse for that sort of the terrible ending and the awfulness of climate change, but also you said that there are more positive things that you do, and I was going to ask you about that. That obviously you've been very effective in providing a warning about climate change.
To start, we're going to play a piece that I've written. It's called Sounds of the Reef, and it's a piece talking about the sounds of our beautiful reef system in Australia and what's happening because of the effects of climate change and the coral bleaching. And as the oceans get warmer, sadly, the fish and the other animals in the area move on or die away. And this piece depicts the sounds of a graph. So we're listening to the data of a graph since 1900 on the cello. Every note that Nick plays is 1 year of ocean temperatures. And as the piece goes on, the pitches get higher and we can hear the sound of the graph. So I hope you enjoy Sounds of the Reef.
Does your work ever include any sort of, well, I know it does include signs of hope because I've heard it on many of your works, but sort of ways forward perhaps, or sort of little prompts as to how people can be part of the solution rather than the problem?
Oh, look, absolutely. And this is something that I think about a lot, actually. That project was 2017, and I first wrote Sounds of the Reef in 2015. So I guess it's nearly 10 years old. But there are a couple of things that come up for me when I think about this. Firstly, if you're putting on a concert of contemporary classical music to audiences talking about climate change, the people who are going to come and see that concert are mostly the converted anyway, who know all about the issues, feel strongly, and it's likely that they're active, if not before, hopefully more likely afterwards. But I would say that a question I ask myself a lot is how to have a really broad impact within the community to do with issues like this. And what I'm interested in at the moment is connection, because when you can connect with a larger set of audience, with a larger audience base, instead of 20 to 100 people that might come to a recital, maybe thousands of people that might come to a festival opening, when you can connect with them and really make them feel something together, then it's more likely that they might go out and have a positive impact in their own communities. Yeah. So I'm quite interested in building works that immerse people in some kind of incredible story about nature. So I think we might chat a little bit more about Plankton and the Stars later, which is a recent fascination of mine with the deep ocean. But a lot of my children's works kind of place the children in a world where they can learn something incredible and beautiful and be immersed in some element of nature. And when they love and understand it, then they're much more likely to be passionate and fight for it themselves. And I think that is likely to be a much more effective way of creating positive change through my work than than being too sort of aggressively negative, because it either turns people off or the people who are hearing it are unlikely to have a big shift either way, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. I mean, I think that, obviously there's two different things going on. There's like Sounds of the Reef is part of your portfolio. And so, you need to see that in the whole, your portfolio, really. And sometimes you have darker pieces, you have lighter pieces, etc.
Exactly. I mean, and you can't shy away from telling the truth with these sorts of stories. And I think it's really important to tell people to give a sense of the urgency. But yeah, like I said, it's if you don't finish with a message of hope, then the audience is left feeling desperate and like they can't have any positive impact. So, and I don't think that's a useful place to leave an audience.
Maybe not. It's all fascinating stuff. I mean, we've really been keen to get artists on because we feel, just for the reasons you've said, that artists can get the message across in some ways more powerfully than someone that's written a book or is providing a lecture or whatever. I read something recently from Brian Eno, and he's a, I suppose, godfather of ambient music, I suppose, in some ways. And he said something about control and surrender. And he said that during our lives, particularly if you live in cities and towns, etc., a lot of the time our focus is on controlling our situation or being in control of our situation. Whereas artists a work of art allows somebody just to surrender to that piece, just let themselves and their feelings open. And it strikes me that's a really, for the reasons you've said, it's a really effective way of communicating to people that is non-intellectual necessarily, but it's about feeling, which I thought was very powerful. And it explained a lot to me as to why we feel, intuitively, we felt artists, we've got to get artists on it. But that sort of phrase explained, I think, why it's important that people have got to have that feeling in order to do something about something.
Absolutely. Yeah, the sort of rational reasoning around it all seems to make sense. But if you don't have this sort of gut intuition, this drive to make it happen, then it's not much use. So yeah, I think that's the power of art, is kind of really tapping into people's deep feelings and emotions around it.
Yes, and that's a lasting feeling. Those feelings are lasting if they're powerful enough and they resonate sufficiently with somebody. They're feelings that people may not be able to articulate, but they will carry them into their everyday lives, those feelings, presumably.
Yes, and I heard something recently that the reason you can't articulate it is it's because it's in the deep ancient part of your brain. What's that bit called? I'm not a neuroscientist.
No,
it's settled a lot deeper than all of the sort of rational things, which are a little bit more superficial. Anyway, you were moving on.
No, I read that about visual. No, it is, and I think that relates also to visual art as well. That the memory, a visual piece, and I imagine it's the same with an oral piece. It stays in the memory, in the deep memory, a lot longer than the written word, for example, which was one of the reasons we wanted to set up SDG Vision, because it's about visuals. It's about what people are doing to contribute to the UN Sustainable Development Goals.
This project is a collaborative public art piece between Boston-based sound, light and performance collective Masari Studios and Melbourne-based performance ensemble the Ad Lib Collective.
To initiate this project, Ad Lib director Thea Rossen spent 2 weeks in Boston with the support of the Hugh Rogers Fellowship, incubating the work with Masari Studios principals Maria Finkelmeyer, Sam Åkerström-Lang, and me, Ryan Edwards.
By gathering information and inspiration from scientists, policymakers, urban planners, environmentalists, and researchers, we aim to create a piece that moves viewers to consider the effects of climate change and engage in a constructive dialogue.
This project will be an immersive public art piece combining large-scale, site-specific video projection mapping and live music performance.
So we talked a little bit about how you promote action, but you seem to do it very practically also with school children and working with school children. Could you tell us a little bit about the process of that and also their reactions perhaps to the work you're doing with them?
Yeah, I love working with kids. They're incredible. They just have a lot less inhibitions than grown-ups do, and they're so much more open to things. Which is awesome. They're also, I mean, it's such a cliche, but they are the future, so if you can inspire and connect with them really deeply on that emotional level, like we were just talking about, then they're going to be the leaders of the future, making the really big decisions, the really big and really tough decisions. So I think it's really powerful work to connect in an authentic, genuine way with kids through art because of all the things I just mentioned. So some of the work that I do has been with Musica Viva, which is a national body that tours chamber ensembles around the country. And I had a trio and we performed Water, Water Everywhere, which was a show based on the Water Concerto by Tan Dun, a Chinese composer. Now, the Water Concerto is literally for giant bowls. The bowls of water are, you can't see my arms, but sort of a big hug in front of you. That's giant bowls of water.
A nice phrase, a big hug in front of you.
Yeah, and so the soloist performs in the bowls of water in front of a symphony orchestra as a concerto soloist, like you would see a violinist play Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto, the same. And so I fell in love with this piece and arranged it for a trio, and we toured that show to over 300 and did over 300 performances in 4 years. And wow. I think we reached around about 50,000 school children. Sure. And the show was all about talking about water sustainability. So the piece tells the story of Tan Dun's life growing up in rural China and his experience of going back to visit the area and how pollution has affected the waterways since then. And we really use that to talk about how important it is to understand and appreciate and look after and fight for water within the show. And then I also get to perform all of Tan Dun's beautiful concerto for these young kids. So it's very contemporary classical music, but it's so lyrical and beautiful to look at. So it's very visual, it's very gestural when I'm playing the water. So that piece has been really powerful because, as I said, about 50,000 kids around Australia have seen it. And they're kids from everywhere. We go to regional, remote, metropolitan schools, and we really connect through a set of resources that go to the school before or afterwards, depending on how the teachers want to do it. So they've got this package of classroom activities where they can have all these conversations around sustainability and talk about how to make water and sound, how to make sound using water. And then the kids are really primed and ready for our show. But it also means that they have a much more in-depth experience of it. So it's been really beautiful working with Musica Viva. I have a second show with them called Walking with the Wilderness, where we commissioned 4 Australian composers to write music about the bush. And we worked with this idea of deep listening, or dadiri, which is an Australian Indigenous term that really means sitting in the environment and listening and receiving the sounds, but also giving back to the environment. We could have an entire podcast talking about dadiri, but it's a beautiful term of just being still enough to be a part of nature and to recognize that it's not us and nature, we are within nature. And so all of our actions have a direct impact.
To know me is to breathe with me. To breathe with me is to listen deeply. To listen deeply is to connect. It's a sound, the sound of deep calling to deep. Dadiri, the deep inner spring inside us. We call on it, and it calls on us. We are river people. We cannot hurry the river. We need to move with the current and understand its ways. We wait for the rain to fill our rivers and water our thirsty earth. We watch our bush foods and wait for them to open before we gather them. We wait for our young people as they grow. The time for rebirth is now. If our culture is alive and strong and respected, it will grow. It will not die, and our spirit will not die. I believe that the spirit of Dadiri that we have to offer will blossom and grow. Not just within ourselves, but in our whole nation.
And so that show took kids on a bit of an oral bushwalk. We learnt about fungi, and they did the calls of a cicada and a frog and a bird call. And that piece had a similar impact, though not as much of a long run as Water, Water Everywhere. So those are two sort of school shows that I've done. And then, as I mentioned, I also write shows for symphony orchestras. So we celebrate the beauty of orchestral music, but I also bring in my love of nature into the concert hall. So we had Nature's Symphony with the West Australian Symphony Orchestra last year, and we had a bunch of field recordings recorded from down south in Western Australia of the sounds of the forest. And then the kids were learning frog calls and cicada calls and layering them up as a little ostinato, which is a repeated pattern. And then the orchestra played Appalachian Spring, that really beautiful, famous solo, and the kids sort of played along with them, being elements of nature. So, I mean, that has a really profound effect on, you know, the 7-year-old who's in the audience and seeing an orchestra for the first time, but also learning about this amazing nature that they are a part of.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's, and as you say, I mean, I've had sort of similar-ish, not quite so dramatic experiences as a child, but, you know, something like that can stay with you all your life and sort of guide you almost, that experience in terms of what you do in life, etc. So I think that's terrific. And I love the way that you balance your more formal musicianship with community engagement and with children, etc. I think that's just so important in this day and age. And I think also the visuals. We'll come on to now Plankton and the Stars, because I just loved watching that piece. It's just I wish I was in the audience. I wish I'd been in the audience. It must have been extraordinary. Just to set the scene. Well, but perhaps you can set the scene. You created it. Yeah, I'll leave it to you to describe.
Okay, well, Plankton and the Stars. It's been a project of mine over a few years. So the version you saw was a sort of a rearrangement of the original piece. I originally developed it with a Boston-based ensemble called Masari Studios, who have an amazing projection artist that they work with full-time. He's just part of their ensemble. So we'll talk about the visuals in a second, but it was really important to me to sort of think about all elements of the performance of that piece. But it's based around this incredible natural phenomenon that kind of blows my mind, the scale of it. It's, let me think about the best way to describe it. The way that phytoplankton floats at the top of the ocean, and then zooplankton, which is the animal version of phytoplankton, and they're both the smallest creatures in the ocean. They travel up and down the water column every single day. So 24 hours, it's the largest migration of a biomass in the world. And it happens every 24 hours, and it happens at night time so that the zooplankton can be safe from predators. And so they drift up to the surface of the water where the stars are twinkling at night. This is what I imagine. The stars are out and twinkling, and the phytoplankton is floating on the surface. And sometimes there's that beautiful phosphorescence, and other times maybe not. But and they feed on the phytoplankton. And so there's this incredible journey that happens every single day. And it's so important to protect the functioning of that cycle, because that is the base of the ocean's food chain, and therefore the base of the Earth's food chain. So if something happens to our phytoplankton, we're in seriously big trouble. So it's a really interesting area of scientific research, and one that I wanted to sort of tell the story of through music. So the piece starts with water, actually. There's performers in water, but there's also an ensemble playing very low metal resonant objects like big gongs, big tam-tams, bass drums. You almost can't hear it on the recording, but it's kind of surround sound. We had the instruments all around the audience. And there's this kind of rumble. So we're deep in the ocean. You know, maybe no one's even been as deep as we are listening to right now. And then the vibraphone comes in. Vibraphone's a particularly favourite instrument of mine, a sort of a metal version of a xylophone. And we bow it with double bass bows. And so you get these sort of beautiful chords that kind of blossom. And as the piece progresses, ever so slowly, the pitches get higher and higher, so that we are following the zooplankton as they travel up the water column. And every now and then there's a gentle swell in the cymbals and the gongs that are being played. So that it kind of, and the swells get more and more intense as we get closer to the surface of the water, and you can feel the ocean kind of pushing and pulling you as you go up. And then suddenly these little bells start tinkling from all around the audience. So, I mean, I'm a bit biased, but I think you would have had a good time in the audience too, Pierre, because the bells tinkle and then the bells intensify. So they get louder and louder and louder as the pitch gets higher, and then suddenly it's kind of released and we reach the surface of the air, of the water. And that's the end of the piece. There is a version where it reverses and you go all the way back down into the depths as well.
Oh, really?
So yeah, that's Plankton in the Stars.
Oh, I'd like to experience that. And the other thing I liked about it was the visuals. I mean, visually you had blue spots of light that I guess represent the stars, the twinkling of the stars. And it was quite magical, I thought. It was lovely. And particularly those big bowls of water in the front were lit up in blue as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think it's so important to think visually when you're putting on a performance. I think long gone are the days of an audience being instructed to sit still and listen to one player play something very difficult on a stage and then walk off again. You know, I think you've got to think about the whole theatre of the experience. So what's the audience doing? What's the lighting doing? Where are the performers staged around so that the audience can get the best sound and visuals? And I love using lighting. I think shining light through water and dimming the lights and doing beautiful lighting effects and projection just really enhances the experience.
Oh,
so I'm glad you think so too.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. I thoroughly agree with you. And some people might argue that it takes the attention off of the music, but personally, I wouldn't have thought so. I think it probably enriches, but I don't know.
Well, I mean, you do have to be careful. It's a fine line. I mean, there's a big craze at the moment where orchestras play along to movies. So you can go to a concert and see the movie up on the screen and the orchestra playing down below. And I think that that's a strong argument. I mean, it's a fun night out. Why not go and see Harry Potter with a live orchestra? But then you watch the screen for the whole time and you don't see the musicians. So I totally understand that that's a really difficult thing to kind of balance. But in my work, it's always about integrating the two and also blurring the lines between the two. So did the music trigger the lighting? Is the lighting part of the music? That's a really interesting world for me to play with.
And I think you've done it in your, I think it's your most recent work, is it Conditions of Growth? You've got sort of amazing visuals at the back from the clip that I'd seen, extraordinary visuals at the back.
Oh, thank you. We worked with an incredible media artist, Sohan Ariel Hayes, who works internationally quite a lot, telling big stories. Often, so for an example, in Perth recently, he projected the stories of the Noongar 6 seasons up onto the trees in Kings Park. So there was thousands of people watching this incredible immersive projection story. And so he's a collaborator of ours, and we were really lucky to work with him for that project. Conditions of Growth was about this sort of concept of deep listening, of sitting still and understanding where we fit within nature and questioning what are the conditions that we need to grow as individuals, as a collective community, and also within nature. And so I had a series of flower pots and worked with an amazing software engineer who devised a system where we had sensor-driven LED lights inside the flower pots. And when the players struck the flower pots, the light lit up. And sometimes we programmed the lights to work the other way. So the lights would light up, triggering the players to play as a little instruction or a different way of being conducted, I guess. And so in that way, we were sort of blurring these lines between the visual and the sonic. And then Sohan's beautiful projections, which were on screens around the performance, were also integrated with the lights in the pots. So sometimes the players would play and the light from the pot would start in the pot and then end up on the screen and kind of glow, moving upwards. He's a genius. It was really great working with him. But I think being able to place the music within that world was pretty special, and hopefully gave the audience some time to sort of sit and think about those conditions for growth.
Yeah, and again, it comes back to me to that sort of that surrender thing about, you know, deep listening and opening yourself up and being aware of connections to the natural world, etc. And I think that that's something that SDG Vision, we're acutely aware of the importance of a shift in consciousness that's required in order to redo some of the damage and pull us back from the catastrophic sort of crisis we're heading towards at the moment. And I used to think it was all about action, just do. But actually, I think that it's more profound than that. I think that people need first to have that awareness, or to that experience of awareness, a shifting in the way that they're thinking and perceiving things. And again, I think that's why your work is so important, because it's so immersive, you know, and it allows people to get themselves away from their day-to-day thinking. And I thought I'd love to see it. Is Conditions of Growth available to watch at all, or is it? That was an excerpt, obviously I saw, so I guess it's part of the work.
The full video is not available, but I do have a sort of 3.5 minute, which is a slightly longer sort of glimpse into the work, which I could definitely share with you. I mean, who knows? Hopefully, one day it will have wings and it might make it to the UK.
Well, that would be lovely. That would be absolutely lovely. And I'll book my ticket for that, I have to say. So we said earlier on that you've worked with scientists. You've collaborated with them. In a way, you've demonstrated how effective that can be with the Sounds of the Reef. How else do you think scientists and artists can come together and collaborate and make a contribution to the Sustainable Development Goals, you know, to the challenges, multiple challenges that we face at this current time?
Oh wow, that's a big
question. Sorry,
I'm not sure if I have all the answers.
You've got 2 minutes to answer.
Yeah. I do think that connection is crucial. That's kind of the linchpin, right, for getting these incredible, very specific things that scientists study and putting them into language of everyday people, or the language of art, and connecting them to the widest audience possible in the most understandable way. So I think that artists have a really vital role to play there. I mean, we can't do the communicating without the work of the scientists. So there's a really beautiful connection and place for collaboration there. Absolutely. I guess another example of connecting audiences with the work of climate scientists is a really beautiful project that Joe Duggan did, D-U-G-G-A-N, I believe. He requested a bunch of climate scientists from all around the globe to write letters about how they feel about the climate crisis. Wow. And I think what was really incredible about that was that it really humanized the people behind the research, you know. So the letters were so deeply moving. They were pretty incredible. And it actually inspired my colleague Jared Yapp and I to write a song cycle based on some of the letters. And then that it was sort of an exhibition of the letters put together by Joe Duggan, went to lots of literary festivals around the world, and then someone set up a way for audience members to respond to the letters. And so there was Post-it notes stuck up on the wall around the letters, kind of responding. And one of the Post-it notes said, "The summers in Hong Kong are getting hotter and hotter." Which, you know, I mean, that's an interesting observation. And another Post-it note just said "stuck." That's how that person felt, stuck. And so we we gathered a couple of the texts from some of the letters with permissions from the climate scientists, and then we used some of these responses from audience members to build our song cycle. And so I used stuck in one of the movements, and it's the only thing that is heard are these 4 syllables, not 4 syllables, 5 letters, S-T-U-C-K. But it was sort of 4.
And she put, in the clip, in the clip that I heard, I just realised I've seen that. She repeats it several times. That's right. Stuck. It's really powerful. Really powerful to watch.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad.
The articulation of someone's frustration, and
exactly. Yeah. Well, that soprano Alice Smither is incredible. I actually met her at the Banff Centre, so it was lovely to work with her again and bring her out to Australia. But she really sort of told the story with only those sort of 5 letters that I gave her in the piece. And then I turned the string quintet that we were working with, I turned them into percussionists as well. So they were kind of tapping and scraping and banging on their instruments, while us, the percussionists at the back, were playing as well. And then we ended by scrunching plastic and paper, and it just got louder and louder and louder and louder and louder as we kind of were all sort of shouting and speaking these different parts of the word stuck. So I guess that's another way that we were trying to connect audiences with the real people who are the climate scientists. I hope that there's heaps more ideas and ways to collaborate, because I think it's really important work.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that, again, it demonstrates very clearly, that interdependence and the integrated nature of different disciplines. Often disciplines are performed in silos, and one discipline doesn't talk to another. But I think you show very clearly the importance of working together, and it's part of the SDGs as well. That whole message that everything's interdependent, everything's integrated. We talked about the plankton, earlier on, which produce what I think over 50% of oxygen on Earth.
Yeah.
Nobody would think about it. Nobody would think about plankton being that important. You take that away, these microscopic little creatures away, and we really are in a bad place.
Yeah, we're in big trouble if anything happens to the plankton.
Yeah, and there are reports, obviously changes in temperature, etc., are affecting sometimes positively, sometimes negatively, plankton across the world in our oceans. So, yeah, again, I think a really important message that you've put across there in a magical way, which I think, and it is magical. It is magical, But
it is magical, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But unless you're there floating on the ocean at night, looking up at the stars, you won't get that reaction or that experience. But you've provided that, which I think is terrific. Anything else coming up at all, Thea, that you want to let our audience know that you're up to, or things that are happening in Australia right now? Or...
Oh gosh, what's coming up? I need to answer that question. Do you know, I'm working on a really beautiful project at the moment, which is not directly related, but I mean, perhaps it is. I'm composing and building the sound design for a new show for babies with disabilities and their carers. And it's been a really beautiful process working with Sensorium Theatre, who just make the most incredible work for children with disabilities. And they've shown me how important and how valuable it is to take the time to be still and sit and listen and connect. And the work that they do with their audiences has just been so refreshing and inspiring to remember how important that connection is between audiences and performers and how much impact you can have. So, I mean, this work isn't explicitly about nature, but of course, I'm putting lots of environmental references into my music.
Sure.
But it's just been a really beautiful time for connection. I'm cooking up a bunch of projects as well. The main one probably is called Aragonite, and it's connected to a deep to the exploration of deep ocean exploration vehicle that went right down 3,000 meters below the surface of the ocean, mapping the floor of the ocean. And so I was connected to some research scientists on board that vessel and have lots of data and amazing footage of some of the crazy creatures that are down there. And so I'm building a project or a series of works called Aragonite, which is the coral substance that captures a whole heap, like hundreds or thousands of years of data of the ocean, kind of like an ice core does the same thing, but these aragonite sort of corals do the same thing. So I'm hoping to tell their story through percussion and art and visuals, and we'll see what happens.
That's fantastic, and I think it's really interesting. I'm really glad I asked the question because you said that the piece, which the theme is children with disabilities, etc., or babies with disabilities, I think you said, and I mean it does. Obviously, our focus is the Sustainable Development Goals, and I think a lot of your work is very relevant, and I don't think it has to be environmentally focused explicitly. You hit that's number 3, good health and well-being. SDG 3, you hit SDG 4, which is quality education, very much so. Number 5, gender equality. I'm not sure. I don't know. I hear you're involved in something called matrescence or matrescence.
I certainly have been involved in matrescence, having gone through it myself. Matrescence is sort of the experience of becoming a mother.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that work for babies is pretty big in connecting with women who have recently become mothers and then are also dealing with all of the additional needs of their beautiful babies who have additional needs. So they've kind of, it's like they're going through motherhood twice in a way, kind of understanding all these layers.
Yeah.
And we use a lot of environmental themes to kind of be with them and be present with them in that performance space.
Yeah, terrific. And again, I think that hits SDG 10, which is reduced inequalities. I would argue your work contributes to SDG 11, which is sustainable cities and communities, because I think if people are more aware of their environment, they can make their environment a better place or be part of that process. Climate action, SDG 13, very much, obviously, a lot of your work is focused on that. 14, life underwater, need I say more? We've been underwater for a lot of this podcast. And partnership for the goals, you work in partnership, SDG 17, with a wide range of people and actors. And I think that it shows the importance that we've discussed about everything's interrelated, and so therefore it's important for us to work with as wide a range of people as possible on creating solutions and making contributions to the Sustainable Development Goals. Thea, thank you so much. It's been fascinating. It's been terrific. And we'll leave links below to various works that you have. And keep in touch with us, please, and let us know what you're doing, because we're always interested to know. We may have interviewed people. It would be great to come for a catch-up chat maybe in a year's time or so. So, terrific.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.
Now, if you enjoyed that, go and have a look at their film and many, many others on sdg.vision.